This is the Balanced Dilemma. We tackle the often uniquely, but not always, female dilemma, managing life, work, family, and self. I'm Maura Carlin.
And I'm Christy Derrico. At the Balanced Dilemma, we speak with women and men to hear their balanced stories. Our guests are entrepreneurs, reinventors, creators, executives, parents, and partners, telling us what we really want to know. How the heck did they manage that? And can you have it all and all at the same time?
At age 30, our guest found herself the oldest member of her family. She had a choice. She could make final plans, or she could fight. Well, Gila Pfeffer joins us with her debut memoir, Nearly Departed, Adventures in Loss, Cancer, and Other Inconveniences. Gila is a Jewish-American humor writer and essayist who splits her time between London, New York, and Instagram. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, The New Yorker, Today.com, Oprah Daily, and more. Humor, faith, and medicine are key to her story of being a 15-year breast cancer survivor and previvor, and we'll talk more about what that is. Gila's Feel It on the First campaign uses tongue-in-cheek photo and video reminders to prioritize breast health and has directly led to earlier diagnoses and treatment for some very grateful women. And we are grateful to have you on the show, Gila. Welcome to the Balanced Dilemma.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to speak to you guys.
Gila, your new endeavor stemmed from your own journey. Tell us about that.
Well, by new endeavor, if you mean my recently published memoir, Nearly Departed, then yes, I experienced by a young age a disproportionate amount of loss and grief, and decided to try to rein in all of that and take myself and my family's health trajectory in another direction. And when I was done doing all that, I decided that I needed to write a book about it. So I did.
It was time to share it with the world, right?
Yeah, I mean, first share it with myself. I think storytellers just need to tell stories, and that's what I am. I'm a storyteller. Share it with the people who got me through the difficult time, my loved ones, my community. And then in line with my breast cancer advocacy, share it with whoever needs to hear messages of prevention, hope, and the importance of using humor to combat adversity.
So why did it take you 15 years to write the book?
Have you ever written a book? No, I'm joking. I first had the idea, you're right, 15 years, because I first had the idea in the moment that I was sitting in my oncologist's office and she was telling me, I never thought I'd have an oncologist. And there I was hearing that I was going to need the same chemo that my mom had had in the early 90s. And the whole thing seemed so ridiculous that here I was being told I had to do the very thing that I'd set out to avoid. And something in my head just said, one day you're going to write a story about this. You're going to write a book about this. But as it turns out, writing a book and publishing a book are, not only hard, but something that I knew nothing about. So I had little kids to raise. I had a life to live. There was an overseas move in the middle of all that. So I kind of shelved that for several years until probably 10 years ago, the idea started creeping up in my head again. But again, you can talk about doing something or you can do it, and there's a big gap in between that. So I'd say about 5 years ago is when I started to get serious about learning what it is actually that goes into writing and publishing a memoir. So I think what took so long is me just not knowing what I was doing and not being fully willing to commit to the project until something in me gave me no choice. Something in me said, you need to do this, so do it.
Sometimes we call it being hijacked by life.
Yeah.
But tell us about the experience of having the genetic testing, finding you carried the BRCA1 gene, and having a double mastectomy, preventative, as I understand.
Yes, the mastectomy was preventative, and the BRCA testing happened not long before the mastectomy. And for listeners, the reason that this is interesting and not sort of humdrum, because everyone does it today, is that this happened 5 years before the surgery happened 5 years before Angelina Jolie popularized the term and the procedure. Genetic testing didn't become available to the average person until I think it was the early 2000s. I had my BRCA testing done in 2005, and unlike today, where anyone can order a kit, spit into a tube, send it off, and find out all kinds of things about themselves, I had a blood test. It was a very expensive blood test. I went privately because I was afraid that if there was any health information that came back that my insurance, but this was before there were laws in place to prevent it, my insurance might not cover me for things that would be considered a pre-existing condition because of my genetic makeup. So it was 2005 when I first heard about BRCA testing, and I immediately I went to my OBGYN and I said, get me this test. Truth be told, I wasn't expecting to find anything other than being BRCA positive because my mom died of breast cancer at 42, her mom died of breast cancer at 49. So I kind of knew what was going on inside me. But even if I hadn't tested positive, which is possible because that's how genetics works, I had already heard about from a friend of mine the concept of a preventative double mastectomy. So I had already decided to do that. As it turns out, I did test positive in 2005. I was pregnant with my third child. My husband and I went on to have a fourth child. And in 2008 is when I had that preventative double mastectomy.
Are you a firm believer in every woman having BRCA testing? Do you think that's something we should all do?
I don't think so. And disclaimer, I have zero medical training whatsoever. I just am very heavily invested in breast health and breast cancer prevention. I think that the guidelines keep changing. The guidelines keep changing even around, when, at what age, and how often to have mammograms. So in terms of genetic testing, the current thinking, from what I understand, is that if you have a family history, and certain other markers, such as being Ashkenazi Jewish, which I am. Ashkenazi Jewish women are much more likely to carry the BRCA gene. There are 3 variations, by the way, than the general population. I don't think the guidance dictates that everyone should have the gene testing. What is recommended, however, and this comes from breast health experts who I know personally, a radiologist, an oncologist, US based, they advise that women have what's called get their cancer risk profile done, which essentially just means going to your doctor, going to your specialist, inputting all the data, family history, your age, your lifestyle, and finding out, if you are at risk. Somebody with a family history would be advised to go for BRCA testing. So I don't believe that it's everyone who needs it. And again, this is based on guidelines, not my own personal belief. If you're asking my own personal belief, no, I don't think everyone should do that unless there's a reason to do it.
Well, that's a really good clarification. In the book, you share that your mom was resistant to a mastectomy when she was first diagnosed with breast cancer. Did her experience play a role in your decision to have a preventative double mastectomy?
Huge. It was the starring role, if you will. Everything that I learned, she died in 1994. I was 20 years old, and everything that fed into my nature of being preventative and getting ahead of things and not letting something blindside you or not letting something get you that you can see coming stemmed directly from her approach to her own health. Her mom had died young of breast cancer. I was just an infant when that happened. So I didn't get to speak to her about it. Breast cancer wasn't spoken of in my house, but for whatever her reasons were, she's not here, so I can't ask her. I'm sure there was a lot of fear going on for her. She already had 5 kids. By the time she was diagnosed, my baby sister was, I believe she was about 16 months old. And so, she came to breast cancer the traditional way. She found a huge lump. She went for a mammogram at 40. It was her first mammogram ever, which I found surprising given her family history. But yes, she had chemo to shrink the tumor. It was a very, very, very large tumor. The tumor responded well to the chemo. And I'm getting all this, by the way, from her medical reports. I'm fortunate enough to have her entire medical file, which I have read 8 million times. And her doctors advised her at that point to have a mastectomy just on the side where the tumor was, once they saw that the chemo had worked so well. And for whatever her reasons, I would imagine out of, fear and all kinds of other emotions, she opted not to. And she opted to try to take a more holistic, sorry, not holistic, an alternative approach of a macrobiotic diet and all these other alternative healing methods that I write about in the book with humor, but a little bit of anger too. And ultimately, the tumor came back with a vengeance, and she did have a mastectomy, but it was really way too far gone by then. And all of that.
This comes at a really good, important juncture to discuss. There's been press recently. You mentioned Angelina Jolie, who was a very good spokesperson for something that was taboo. But Elle Macpherson has come out recently with her approach. Did this remind you of your memory of what your mother decided?
Oh yeah, there was a little bit of PTSD going on there when I read that article. Elle Macpherson was reported to have been diagnosed with breast cancer. This was years ago, but the story is coming out later. I don't know why, but apparently she was advised by many doctors to have chemotherapy, and she refused. She didn't want the chemotherapy. She decided to heal herself in another way. She went to a beach and she meditated and did all these alternative methods of healing. And while it's wonderful that worked for her, it reminded me, and she spoke about the difficulty in her decision in doing that and how her older kids were uncomfortable with it. But it just smacked of what my mother went through. And maybe Elle Macpherson has, perhaps the resources and the time to, I don't know, make that non-medical approach work. But it certainly did not work for my mother. So
and it might not have worked for you. That was a really
tough thing to read.
It might not have worked for you because when you had your double mastectomy, it revealed you already had cancer growing in one side.
Well, right. I came at it preventatively, and in that preventative mastectomy, at 34, after having gone for years of mammograms, ultrasounds, MRIs, living a healthy life, doing all the right things, there was early but aggressive cancer growing in one breast already. So yeah, I don't think I could have meditated that away, no.
And you'd had to take further steps, as I understand it. Besides, you had chemo and you removed your ovaries?
Yeah, so essentially, and this is where cancer risk profile comes in, because I had the preventative double mastectomy, the idea was to have the same result that Angelina Jolie had 5 years later, which was to announce to the world that she did this thing and the risk is behind her and she no longer has to worry about the breast cancer that took her mother. In my case, the early, meaning they caught it early, but aggressive tumors were there. And given my young age, my family history, and my BRCA status, I was advised to have 8 rounds of preventative chemotherapy. And preventative or any kind of chemotherapy in terms of breast cancer has the same impact on the body. So even though it was preventative and that we weren't trying to shrink a tumor, I still suffered all of the, the hair loss and the other side effects and indignities. And we took it further by doing what's called hormone therapy, which is not hormone replacement therapy. It was removing my ovaries in order to stop estrogen production because my specific type of breast cancer was estrogen positive. And that's something important to know. There are different types of breast cancer. So it is important to speak to your medical team about what the best approach is. But yeah, I definitely got more than I bargained for going in for the preventative double mastectomy.
So this is really a lot for a young mother of 4 children. And you talk about in your book how humor and faith got you through. Let's start with the faith part of it. What was the role of faith in your recovery, in your decision making, in everything about your life?
So I'm a proud Jewish woman. I was raised Orthodox Jewish. My husband and I are raising our family Orthodox Jewish, and we very much hold dear the customs, the rituals, the practices, the values of Judaism. And one of the tenets of Judaism is, and I'll say it in English as opposed to the Hebrew, is to guard your soul very much, which means you must do everything in your power to save your life and someone else's life. So when I heard about the concept of a preventative double mastectomy, as terrifying as it sounded, and I was absolutely terrified, I knew that this was something that could save my life. So while it was a survival instinct, there was also something built into me about being Jewish, this nature of survival. I am also the granddaughter of 4 Holocaust survivors. All 4 of my grandparents, who are no longer with me, went through the concentration camps. They each had a number tattooed on their arms by their captors. And the fact that they survived must have somehow, through epigenetics, trickled down to the next generation. So there is this survival instinct in me, and that's a very Jewish thing too. Additionally, our community just really comes together in a crisis. And I lived in a Jewish community, so people from my kids' school and from our synagogue were all there to just help me and my family in so many ways. And for that, I will always be thankful. And I know that has, in my case, everything to do with the fact that these are Jewish values. Is you look after people, you help them get through difficult times.
Well, Gila, when you and I have spoken, what I really related to in your story was how you rely upon faith in your everyday life and how you start your morning. Tell us about that, and how has that helped you with this big burden that you've had to deal with?
Yeah, so every day, as corny as this sounds, corny alert, I say a gratitude prayer. In Hebrew, it's called the Modeh Ani, which means I am thankful to you, which is a thankful to God. When we were little kids in preschool, we started each day in school saying the prayer, and then somewhere along the line, I just dropped the practice. And after my surgery, I was put in touch with this wonderful massage therapist who would come to my house and sort of try to straighten me out after my mastectomy and all the muscle tension that was happening. And she was with me on this journey of finding out that there was cancer in there, and just sort of, as the story unfolded, she was very healing in her words. And one thing she advised me to do, this wonderful Jewish French woman, she said, I advise that you wake up every morning and you say the Modeh Ani prayer, and you take the time to list off the things you're grateful for, no matter how big or small. So the obvious ones were, listing the people in my family, having a nice warm bed to sleep in, heat or air conditioning, depending on what the season was, food, sustenance, community, birds chirping, sunshine. This idea that starting the day out with, and this isn't a quintessentially Jewish practice. There's a lot of people practice gratitude.
Absolutely.
It's
applicable
it is gratitude,
to non-denominational,
but
every denomination. Gratitude. It's applicable to any denomination or non-denomination. It's gratitude is the thing that fills your soul.
Yeah, for sure. But it kind of took me back to I remembered being, in preschool and saying these prayers, and here I was as an adult saying them again, but obviously through a very different viewpoint, through somebody who wasn't saying it by rote. I was saying it with intention. And I was saying, well, here are all the things that I'm grateful for, including modern medicine, including genetic testing. And till today, 15 years later, I start every single day. It doesn't mean that I don't, lose my cool later in the day. Of course I do. I'm human. But I start each day at least taking stock of whatever is around me, in my mind, in my immediate vision, to just say, here's what you have to be thankful for. And it's a brief connection with God.
Did that help you avoid the why me syndrome? It sounds like you didn't really experience it. You just took control and did what you had to do and didn't spend time on that. Was that from faith?
There was no why me happening. I don't know if it's from faith. I'm sure that there are devout people who might ask why me. I think that faith probably helps lessen that tendency. I just didn't see the value of why meing it. Once you go down that rabbit hole, it's hard to get back out. And I'm a very pragmatic person. There's an anecdote in the book where my dad refers to me as a pragmatic bitch, which I took as a compliment.
What a compliment.
Well,
yes, it's a compliment. It's like, yeah, I get stuff done.
Compliment.
Here's the problem. Let's solve it. Can we solve it with duct tape? No. Can we solve it with What other resources have we
Bubblegum?
got?
No,
But
but
I have to ask
Glue.
this. There's something that struck me as funny that you only recently became comfortable admitting you're from Staten Island. Now, one of us, Christy, is from Staten
you're going
Island.
to have to take a guess.
You can guess which, but tell us about that.
Did you know?
Could you tell?
No.
I knew we were bonded, Gila.
You.
But only one of us.
The most beautiful borough is Staten Island. Yes.
Okay, well, that gave
Sure.
it away.
All right, that gave it away.
That's
But
one way of looking at it. Yeah,
Well-
I make that joke because I grew up on Staten Island and I started out going to Jewish day schools there. And eventually, when that school closed, I was shipped off to Brooklyn, and I thought it was literally like Girl in the City. I'm like, I've made it. I'm in Brooklyn now. But a lot of my friends wouldn't really. I'd end up going to their houses. They wouldn't want to come to my house because there wasn't really the subway system doesn't hit Staten Island. There's no public transportation. So there was also the garbage dump, if you'll recall.
Yes.
Was
everyone
major-
talks about the dump with Staten Island, unfortunately, but there's a lot more to it. But one other thing before we move on from your faith journey. Your family practices the Sabbath, and we've talked about that here. That some influencers have hijacked this religious practice because it helps them disconnect. Has that actually had a hidden benefit for you and your family to not be able to dive into technology from Friday to Saturday?
Absolutely, 100%. It's sunset, sundown to sundown. It's 25 hours of tech free. I didn't come up with this term, but I've heard it referred to as disconnecting to reconnect, or connecting through disconnecting. And yeah, a lot of people, tech writers are finding this 6-day tech week to be very, very helpful. We are all online all the time. We're all addicted to it. So Shabbat just happens to be a built-in way of enjoying a complete and total tech break. And I think I can say for me personally, it saves me mentally. I think it's been great for our family. We sit down to the Friday night table for Shabbat dinner, and we're actually talking to each other. Sometimes we're arguing, but we're still talking.
But humor doesn't have to take that break for Shabbat. So tell us how humor helped you in your journey.
Oh, you got to have humor. You got to have humor in the best of times, but you really got to have it in the worst of times. I write satire, and that's really what satire is. Satire is the humor of sort of anger and indignation. So you can be angry at something and you can rage about it, or you can take the wind out of its sails and make fun of it. So all throughout my ordeal, even from the time my mom was sick, and then ultimately when she passed away, same thing with my dad, and later when I was going through my own chemo and having the ovaries out. It's not that I was making fun of it or making light of it. That's not what it is, but it's about finding the humor in it. If there's something that's funny in the moment, instead of saying, "Oh, that's inappropriate," this is sacred, it's sacrosanct, you may not joke about it. My siblings and I, we'd crack jokes about it. That's the entire balance of my books. The Balanced Dilemma podcast. The balance of my book is finding the heartbreaking and the hilarious, and how do they live alongside each other. And I worked really hard to sort of get that balance right, so that one didn't occupy more space than the other. And for me, humor, whether I spoke the jokes out loud or just had them stuck in my head, that is really what got me through. You can take yourself somewhere else and just have an alternative scenario running. While the chemo is running into my veins, my brain is making up songs about chemo that ended up in the book.
I think that the title says it all, Nearly Departed. That's very funny. But I do want to get to your aha moment, which you and I had discussed, and something you said to me that you realized at one point, no one is getting the best of me. Now, you could listen to that phrase and think it means one thing, but for you, it meant something different. What does that mean to you, and what did you do about that?
Specifically relating to me, it was the aha moment of going from being a working mom to a stay-at-home mom. I had a career in fashion for many years, which I enjoyed and loved. I was proud of. Eventually, that moved into, in the early days of e-commerce, I did digital marketing and e-commerce type stuff. And when I had my first child, I went from full time to part time. I eventually went from part time to consulting. I even had a very ahead of his time feminist boss who he sent the IT guy over to my house to set me up to work from home, which was great. And I thought that's the answer to my problems. I'm just going to work from home, and my baby is just going to work along on my schedule. And
Common misconception.
Yeah, right.
yeah,
because they take
that's
care of
just-
themselves.
That's not how it went. And my aha moment happened in a Stop and Shop where I was trying to do grocery shopping, and I had, an old Motorola flip phone because that's what we had in those days. And there was a problem at the warehouse that I had to solve, and I abandoned my full grocery cart, ran to my car to go home to my computer because there was no handheld, iPhone from which to solve the problem. And that was when I realized that no one was getting the best of me. At work, I was thinking about my family. When I was with my family, I was thinking about work. And fortunately, I was in a position, my husband and I were able to make the decision for me to set the career aside and let him, man that part of our household. And I was able to be a stay-at-home mom, which I viewed as a privilege. I still view that as a privilege. But that was the no one was getting the best of me. I thought I was failing on all fronts. So I'm like, I'm gonna pick one. And for me, it was focusing on my family.
That's a very common feeling for particularly young mothers, is I'm not doing anything well.
Right. We've talked about that.
And I was exhausted. Oh God, the exhaustion. It wasn't good for anyone. But again, I have to say that I had the privilege and the luxury of doing that because not everyone does, and that's something else that I can add to my Modeh Ani prayer to be grateful for. And when I was ready to come back to a career now as a writer, I was able to segue back into that. And I still, even though my kids are older, I still struggle to find that balance of how much time and when to dedicate to who, because kids will be texting you, needing you for things at all hours of the day. And how do you split your day up and your time up? You're making constant micro decisions about where to put your attention.
Or making boundaries. And this brings us to your latest career turn, which is you're an influencer and an advocate. Why don't you tell us about Feel It on the First, which I absolutely think I love, and it's very humorous. Tell us what that means.
Right. So Feel It on the First is refers to originally it referred to doing a breast self-exam. It's literally feeling it on the first of the month. Every first of the month, I post a tongue-in-cheek, funny, I hope, photo of me holding up two spherical objects, be they basketballs, frying pans, lemons. In July for my pub month, it was 2 copies of my book, in order to constantly drive home the message with humor and take the fear out of it, the importance of keeping breast health top of mind. Am I an influencer? I don't know, but I can tell you that I've been at it for 6 years now, and I've never missed a post, the Feel It on the First posts, and I talk about breast cancer in between, but I get lots of DMs from people around the world, mainly women, who send me pictures of things that reminded them of me. Oh, Gila, look at these picture of 2 clouds that look like 2 fluffy boobs. It made me think of you. My kids' 2 cereal bowls on the table, snapshot, send a picture. What that means is they're playing along with the game of seeing boobs everywhere they look, but really what I'm doing is I'm making breast cancer move from maybe not on their minds to a bit further up in their minds. I have gotten messages from people who've said that my posts have led them to do a self-exam, and they have found something, they have sought medical attention. I'm always thrilled when they write back to me to say, hey, guess what? I got my results back. It was benign. It was nothing. Unfortunately, a few times I've heard from people who have, women who have found something and have gone on to be diagnosed with breast cancer. And they have told me, very, very clear terms, my posts led them to check, which led them to investigate, which led to an earlier diagnosis and a better prognosis. And to me, that's worth everything. I'm not Angelina Jolie. I can't speak to millions of people at once, but if I get to people one person at a time and get women thinking about breast cancer prevention a little bit more than they were before, that's success to me.
Well, that's a PSA if ever I heard one. Tell us about that little pink hair that you have going on there. What's that about?
That is about, originally it was a blonde streak. That is a celebration. It took about 3 years after chemo. When my hair started falling out, I shaved my head because, again, taking control, I didn't want to watch it just come out in wisps. I was like, get it all off. It took about 3 years to get it back to my natural shoulder length. And not long after that, I decided to put a bleach blonde streak in my hair just because it was a celebration of having hair. And then not long after that, I had the idea to uh, slap some pink on there. All it really is, I buy a drugstore brand of pink and I, swipe it on and I top it up every, once or twice a week. Um, if I'm being honest, originally it didn't start out as a specific breast cancer related color because I think that breast cancer shouldn't only have one color and shouldn't only happen in October. We should be thinking about it all the time. But I've sort of over the years leaned into the fact that I am a breast cancer prevention advocate. I do have a pink streak in my hair. It does drive the message home more. So now I proudly sport this because if it gets people thinking about their prevention more, then yeah,
Love
let's
it.
do it.
Looks super hip. So we had another guest on the show, TJ Hills, who's written the book Sex, Drugs, Babies, and Breast Cancer: Health Benefits of Estrogen Gene Testing. We're not going to dive into that. People can listen to her episode. But it brought us to the subject of products and what is in our products. And you told me a story about your favorite perfume. Tell us about that.
Oh, yes. Again, this is not an area where I'm an expert. I can just speak as a consumer. And in terms of products, we have to start paying more attention to what chemicals are in there. And while we'd like to think that, the FDA or some other legislature bodies are looking out for our best interest, maybe they're not. My daughter, actually, my 21-year-old daughter is quite savvy when it comes to this. She's got an app where she scans products to see what rating they have in terms of how healthy and safe they are. There was
What should we
a
be looking for?
perfume.
Can you tell
Sorry?
us what we should be looking for? How do you rate what's safe and what isn't safe?
I wish I could give you information on that. I can email it to you later. I don't have that top of mind. I just know that speaking to the perfume thing you were talking about, I had a favorite perfume where I went into, and this is where in London where I live, and I think in Europe they're stricter with ingredients that go into products. But one day my perfume was not on the shelf anymore. And I asked why. They said, "Oh, it's temporarily discontinued, but it'll be back. They're reformulating it because it didn't live up to the EU standards of health and safety, but in the US it was readily available." So that was that was kind of probably the first time that I really started to pay attention to different different markets and different governments and what chemicals they'll allow into products. The one thing I will say is no one's coming to save you, right? It's up to us, the consumers, to look at ingredients and do the research to find out. I can find out the name of the app that my daughter uses
You'll
to
share it
scan.
with us and we'll
It's
put it
not
in our
coming to me now,
notes. And
but
I've heard
she
about
will
it.
not buy things that aren't a high enough number of acceptability in terms of what ingredients are in there.
Yeah, you have to be your own advocate. I want to get to another thing that we talked about with boundaries, and it deals with balance. And a Bosu ball, which many of us have used, the half moon ball in exercise, which really stands for both sides up. And
Yep.
what does that mean to you as far as boundaries and balance?
I use the Bosu as a metaphor for balancing quite a lot because anyone who stood on a Bosu on either side, the flat side or the rounded side, the way it works is you're not making huge movements. You're balancing yourself through teeny, teeny, almost imperceptible shifts, and it's constant. I don't think, I mean, if there's anyone who can stand perfectly still on a Bosu, I'd love to meet them. I've never seen it. And I think with life, it's not, you never really hit your sweet spot and stay there. It's a constant, minute to minute, hour to hour, year to year reevaluation of your priorities. It's literally triaging. Our needs change as we age. For me, I know my kids' needs aren't the same as they were when they were little. And so it's the importance of remembering to be fluid and open and not rigid, but also constantly be reevaluating what what your boundaries are. Something you said no to yesterday, you may say yes to tomorrow, and that's your prerogative. And that's something that you will have considered and thought about because you've shifted your priorities a little bit.
So this is the balance dilemma, and we have to ask you, what does balance mean to you? And do you think you can have it all and all at the same time?
Oh, well, I'll answer in the reverse order because I'm just a rebel that way. I think that no, you cannot have it all. I know that, there's the saying you can have it all, just not at the same time. I don't even know that that's true. There is a piece in my book, like sort of a humor interlude, where I talk about the phrase having it all should be banned and just not allowed because it's setting anyone who even tries to attain it up for failure. There's no such thing as that. It's, as we talked about, it's the balance, going back to your question about balance. It's about deciding what are your priorities. Everything, not everything gets first place or second place or third place, and those things can shift around. I think that balance looks like something that is not static. It's just constantly moving. I think it's incredibly difficult to achieve, but as you've both said, it's about boundaries, and sometimes boundaries can appear to someone on the outside as being mean or stingy or saying no. But balance and boundaries are what serves you, what serves your family, what serves your system of balance. It's very personal and it's ever changing.
Well
Right.
said.
It's at that given time. What advice would you give to that 25-year-old Gila before she dealt with all of this?
Uh, how much time do we have?
2 minutes.
Okay, by 25 is an interesting age to choose because by then I'd lost my mom. I actually got married at 25. I was in this really interesting spot of a really good, positive, hopeful place. I loved my career. I found a great guy to marry. Having said that, at the same time, I would tell 25-year-old Gila, number one, you can't have it all, so get ready to choose. And number two, take some deep breaths and calm down.
Great advice.
Breathing's
it.
very important. Breathing's more important than 25-year-old Gila would have realized, and 50-year-old Gila is still working on breathing through yoga and walks and switching off and all that as and when. That's the advice that I would give to me.
Can you tell our listeners where they can find you?
And your book.
Yeah, thank you. You can find me primarily on Instagram and Threads. My handle is @Gila Pfeffer. If you go to any social media platform, if I'm on there, it's @Gila Pfeffer. That's the benefit of having a somewhat a unique name. My book, which if you don't mind, I'm going to hold up, is Nearly Departed, Adventures in Loss, Cancer, and Other Inconveniences. It's available pretty much wherever you buy your books. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, both physical and online. If you go to my website, gilapfeffer.com, there's a link there that'll take you to all the places you can buy it as well. And if you do read it and do enjoy it, please DM me and let me know. I'm very responsive on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you.
Congratulations on the book. So glad that we got to connect with you. You were really inspirational, and thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for sharing your story with everyone. It's been a pleasure.
It was my absolute pleasure and honor. Thank you so much for having me both.
And I'd also like to thank LMC Media for the use of this studio. LMC is a not-for-profit in Mamaroneck, New York. If you'd like to use the studio or donate, go to lmcmedia.org and you can either book time or you can donate or you can get involved. Thank you for joining us, Gila.
Please follow us, listen to us, and rate us on our platforms, Spotify, Apple, and our website, thebalancedilemma.com, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter and email us your suggestions. There's no cost, but it means a lot to us.